Welcome to Silmarillion chat number 12, which is covering the penultimate chapter. And also, we're now out of the Quinta Silmarillion and the first stage stuff. The penultimate chapter being Akallabêth, chapter, section, whatever you want to call it. The Akallabêth is the downfall of Numenor. So remember, in the first stage, at the end of the first stage, the Dúnedain or Atani, the loyal men, who of the three peoples who stay loyal to the elves, they are given their own, as a reward, their own land, their own great island in the middle of the Great Sea, and they are able to keep in touch with elves that way, and also kind of enjoy peace and security away from the chaos of Middle-earth proper. The other loyal men, of course, Boar's Eastlings, have been eliminated. So here we have a chapter which is, how long is it? 23 pages. Not incredibly long, but long in the context of the Silmarillion, which I think the longest chapter is 29, but which encompasses the whole of this story of Atlantis. I say this because we're told it is Atalante. The chapter ends, but these things came not into the tale of the drowning, and Numenor, of which now all is told. If they, but the exiles on the shores of the sea, if they turned towards the west in the desire of their hearts, spoke of Marnu Falmar that was whelmed in the waves, Akallabêth the downfallen, Atalante in the Eldarin tongue. This is a bridge narrative, then, in a sense, much like we've had other mythical narratives, like in the Silmarillion, like, oh, why are there sun and moon? Why is there a morning star? Why do things work like they do? Why does the darkness scare us? All kinds of things. And the Akallabêth is not, it wasn't written to explain Atlantis, but it's Tolkien building in that widely spread, nigh universal Atlantic Ocean legend, and saying, okay, so what does that mean? How does that fit into this legendarium? So the downfall of Numenor starts, and it's not surprising given that's the name of it, on a downbeat note. It's said by the elves of the Eldar that men came into the world in the time of the shadow of Morgoth, and they fell swiftly under his dominion. But it says, but some turned from evil and left, and they were pursued by Morgoth, but they came and became friends with the Eldar. Of them was sprung upon the side of his fathers bright Elendil. And in the lay of Elendil, it was told how at the last, when the victory of Morgoth was almost complete, he built his ship Vingalot, that men call Rothinzil, and voyaged upon the unsailed seas, seeking ever for Valinor. And he eventually finds them, and we did that last week. And the Dúnedain alone of the kindreds of men fought for the Valar, whereas many others fought for Morgoth. And the Valar chose that those who were ignoring them, men who ignored them, would be left for a time, and the Dúnedain were given, he didn't want to abandon them. The gods didn't, Manwë and the other Valar. Morgoth still has power, and the Eldar are mostly returning into the west, apart from a few, and the fathers of men are rewards also given. As the Valar turn away from Middle-earth, they say, look, we'll draw you out from this evil, and we'll give you this wonderful island. It's not Valinor. You're sundered from both Middle-earth and Valinor by a wide sea. A land was made for them to dwell in, neither part of Middle-earth nor of Valinor, for it was sundered from either by a wide sea. It was near to Valinor. It was raised by Ossé, and the Eldar brought flowers. It was called Andor, the land of gift, and the star of Elendil shone bright in the west as a token that all was made ready, and as a guide over the sea, and men marvelled to see that silver flame in the paths of the sun. And so the Dúnedain sail from ruined Beleriand, following the star, and the Valar lay at peace, so they make it safely, and they find this wonderful place, and they call that land Elena, which is starwards, but also Anadune, which is westerness, Numenore, in the High Eldarin tongue. This was the beginning of that people that in the Grey Elven speech were called the Dúnedain, the Numenorians, kings among men. But they did not thus escape from the doom of death that Ilúvatar had set upon all mankind. They were mortal still, though their years were long. Therefore they grew wise and glorious, and they were tall, and the light of their eyes was like the bright stars, but their numbers increased only slowly in the land, though daughters and sons were born to them fairer than their fathers, yet their children were few. So he's setting up a tension and conflict here that these men, and of course you should have in mind, especially given that the Numenorians speak a language pretty much the most influenced by Semitic languages of all Tolkien's languages. Numenorian is Adonaic is. You should have in mind the idea that in the Old Testament Hebrew Bible narratives you have Adam, who lives to 900 and something, and then his son Seth 900 and something, and then Methuselah, of course, the oldest, lived 980 or something like that, and they have sons, but then you see a declining maximum age, and you have Abraham, who is still fairly hale and hearty at 80 or 90, but is infertile. His father only had Seth into his hundreds. Seth only had children into his hundreds. By the time of this very long-lived man, by Abraham, the lifespan has nonetheless declined so much that you're only living perhaps 100 if you're of the great folk, really. And that's separate from war and disease. And so the same thing's happening here, that they have great long lifespans, but there's a tension that they want to have more, and their age span will decline, but we'll get to that. We hear a description of this island, which is tantalising, I think, and is I will probably say this again, but I'll say it now. There's something here that this alone makes the TV series you want. I know part of the problem is that this is not part of the license deal, so they're using the appendices, they're only using the version of Numenor that exists there for Rings of Power. I haven't watched it, I don't currently plan to, so I don't take a view on it, but when I hear about what some of the things people say, I think, so it sounds like your complaint might be something to do with decisions about time span, about locale and stuff like that. It strikes me that this on its own, and I think there are reasons why Rings of Power went for what it did, beyond rights access, but I think you look at this and think this is the series you make. You make a series about the whole history of Numenor, or you make a series about the back end of the Akallabêth, particularly the last couple of kings described of the 24 or whatever it is, 23. But yes, you get a good description of this island, which itself is rich enough, and you think there's so much here. You get the chief city on the western coast, Dúnedain, a mountain in the centre called Menel Tama, the Pillar of Heaven, an open space on the top hallowed to Eru Ilúvatar. Remember Faramir and his friends face west to say a silent grace, to think a silent grace in Return of the King, is it? And or is it no two towers, of course. And you could say, well, they're facing the Valar there, but it's something where the facing the west is symbolic, and the kind of the religious undertones to do with the worship of Eru are there in many places through the books, and yeah, here very explicitly there's just a temple to Eru in the centre. At the feet of that mountain is Armenelos, fairest of cities, which is where Elros makes his capital. Elros chooses to be human, whereas Elrond chooses to be elven, because Ilúvatar, says to the Valar, this is what to Manwë, this is what you should do. Elros gets to live 500 years, and the Dúnedain for many years dwelt under the protection of the Valar, in the friendship of the Eldar. The Second Age, remember, it takes as long as the Third Age, pretty much. I think it takes longer. Is it 3,400 years? The First Age from the rising of the sun is only 590 or so, or 600 years. Maybe slightly longer if you're counting the founding of Numenor as the start of the Second Age. I don't think you would, probably. I don't know. I forget what the exact cut-off point is. The First Age is much longer than that if you count the years before that, the years of the trees particularly, where there's over 1,000. The problem is that they're not the same length, so hence why we measure it like we do. But the Second Age is as long as the Third Age. It's over 3,000 years. For though the people still use their own speech, their kings and lords and Numen spoke also the Elven tongue. They're protected by the Eldar and the Valar. The Lawmasters led Quenya, and the lords take Eldarin names. They become mighty in crafts, but they could have taken over Middle Earth, but they are men of peace. They love shipbuilding and seacraft. They became mariners whose like shall never be again since the world was diminished. And voyaging upon the wide seas was the chief feat and adventure of their hardy men in the gallant days of their youth. Tolkien sets up, like Tolkien, and if you want to think of it as masculinity, you can. I think that's how he would have thought of it. He has a complex stance in terms of, not complex in our terms now, but complex in terms of he doesn't have a one-note answer to things. He both thinks there's glory in battle, but that battle and war are ultimately tragic and wasteful. They have a single purpose. I love not the sword for its swiftness, nor the arrow, sharpness, nor the arrow for its swiftness, etc., but for that which they defend, Faramir says. And that's how he is superior to Boromir. And how he's more like his father, Denethor, who hates war and seeks to avoid it if he can, or use whatever means he can of outfoxing Sauron. But there is a hearty and adventurous and jolly adventurousness, I guess, which is perfectly fitting, which is the same instincts but applies something healthy. And Bilbo's adventure falls into that. It's why Bilbo is not permanently scarred by it, by the adventures of the Lonely Mountain at least. Frodo's problem is different. Frodo is actually injured psychically in a way that is deeper than Bilbo's injury, because Frodo comes so much closer and also encounters so much darker evil. But Bilbo is more or less able to go back and go there and come back again intact, because it's an adventure and hard things happen, but generally speaking, and sad things happen, but generally speaking, it's within the realm of adventure. And even better, and you hear of Tuor and Elendil in the Silmarillion sailing around, and of course part of it is just they seem to like sailing around. It's fun, it's good, it's healthy, and so a contrast in Tolkien's vision of the heroic men, and therefore, if you like, his vision of masculinity, is that war is a necessary evil which nonetheless may produce good and glorious things, but is nonetheless still, as Mandos would say, still finally bad, necessary but a bad thing, whereas exploring and adventuring are good things. The Dúnedain can't go west, at least beyond their own coasts. They can't go so far west they can't see their coasts. But the Valinor still remains, and the Valar remain, and the Numenorians can sometimes even see far from the west a city white shining on a distant shore, House of Tom Bombadil, Frodo's dream, and a great harbour and a tower. For in those days the Numenorians were far-sighted, yet even so it was only the keenest eyes among them that could see this vision, from the Men Ultama, i.e. the temple to God, maybe, or from some tall ship that lay off their western coast as far as it is lawful for them to go. For they did not dare to break the ban of the lords of the west, but the wise among them knew this distant land was not indeed the blessed realm of Valinor, but was Avalone, the haven of the Eldar upon Eressia, easternmost of the Undying Lands. And thence at times the firstborn still came sailing to Numenor in oarless boats, as white birds flying from the sunset. And they brought to Numenor, what a wonderful line, and they brought to Numenor many gifts, birds of song and fragrant flowers and herbs of great virtue. And a seedling they brought of Celeborn, the white tree that grew in the midst of Eressia, and that was in its turn a seedling of Galatheon, the tree of Tuna, the image of Telperion that Yavanna gave to the Eldar in the Blessed Realm. This becomes relevant for both the end of the Second Age and stuff that happens in the Third Age, in the kingdoms, well, in the kingdom of Gondor. The grew blossomed, it's called Nimloth. And so the Dúnedain go eastward, not set westward. They go from the darkness to the north, the heat to the south, beyond the south to the nether darkness. They come even to the inner seas and sail about Middle-earth. Remember, it's a flat earth here. And glimpse from their high prows the gates of morning in the east. And the Dúnedain came at times to the shores of the great lands, and they took pity on the forsaken world of Middle-earth, and the lords of Numenor set foot against the western shore in the dark years of men, and none yet dared to withstand them. And they bring corn and wine, they instruct in the sowing of seed and the grinding of grain and the hewing of wood. Atlantis is a blessing to the great lands, to Middle-earth proper. It is a place of civilization and goodness, of technological progress, and of generosity. And the men of Middle-earth are comforted, and here and there, upon the western shores, the houseless woods drew back, and men shook off the yoke of the offspring of Morgoth, and unlearned their terror of the dark. And they mistake the Numenorians for gods, but there is something good that has happened here. And it's a balance, actually, that Tolkien believes in balance with nature, but he does also believe in human civilization. He doesn't think he's not Ted Kaczynski, is what I'm saying. It's not kind of like, oh well, blow up everything. He thinks there is such a thing as balance, and integration and organisation. And the houseless woods are not a place for men to dwell, really. You might dwell in and around the woods, but you shouldn't simply live as barely more than animals, is Tolkien's view. And the Numenorians help them at their point where they are still ordered and integrated. But the Numenorians began to hunger for the undying city. And the thing is, this is because they're scared of death. Not just of death, but of weariness. That when they grow very old, they're alive, but they are sad. They're sad in the sense that they know that there is nothing more really for them here. A shadow falls upon them in which maybe the will of Morgoth was at work that still moved in the world. One thing I should have actually said earlier is Morgoth is put beyond, or is it at the end of the Silmarillion? He's put beyond the walls of the world, but he is still in control. Or rather, his will still works, his intuition and instinct still works amongst his creatures, and perhaps, as they say here. And there's increasing talk of rebellion amongst the Numenorians. The Eldar report this back, and Manwë was grieved, seeing a cloud gather on the noontide of Numenor. We've heard of the noontide of Valinor already. This great time of the two trees. Noontide is the great time. He sends messengers who speak earnestly to the king. And they plead with him. It's not the land of Manwë that makes its people deathless, but the deathless that dwell therein have hallowed the land. And there you would but wither and grow weary the sooner, as moths in a light too strong and steadfast. It wouldn't even work if you came. You don't benefit from this. This, of course, should mind us of not of the declining years or of the death of men in after Eden, but of the tree in Eden. There is but one rule for the Dúnedain: do not sail west beyond sight of your shores. And now, wherever their temptation has come from, they've come to think that eating of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, if you want the comparison, they've come to think that this one thing is the only thing that can make them happy, and that they've been lied to at some level about it. The king says at the time, "Does not Elendil, my forefather, live, or is he not in the land of Aman?" And the elves who, well, messengers, I don't know if they're elves, it could be Eonwi, even Maiar, but the elves probably say, no, he has a fate apart. He chose to be an elf. The Eldar, you say the Eldar are unpunished when they did bad, but you are punished for the rebellion of men. But your death is not appointed for a punishment. Thus you escape and leave the world, and are not bound to it in hope or in weariness. Which of us should therefore envy the others? There are different gifts of Ilúvatar, different curses, or dooms rather, of Ilúvatar. We go in grief but not despair, to slightly misquote, I think, Aragorn, but pretty much that going beyond the circles of the world, there is more than memory there. There is something else there, i.e. heaven. The Numenorians are stubborn, and there is a continued debate, and the elves warn, they be of the Dúnedain, who escaped from the shadow of old, beware. The will of Eri may not be gainsaid, and the Valar bid you earnestly not to withhold the trust to which you are called, lest soon it become again a bond by which you are constrained. Hope rather that in the end even the least of your desires shall have fruit. The love of Arda was set in your hearts by Ilúvatar, and he does not plant no purpose. Nonetheless, many ages of man unborn may pass ere that purpose is made known, and to you will be revealed, and not to the Valar. You'll find out what the purpose of mankind is by being humans, not necessarily Numenorians, but humans. And I guess you could see this in Tolkien thinking way ahead, perhaps in his own belief system, to Jesus, or something like that. Some sense that there is a great salvation history to do with God and man, Eru and humanity, which is not the same thing as the story of the Eldar. This happens in the days of Tar-Kiriatan, the shipbuilder, and of Tar-Atanamar, his son. It was Tar-Atanamar, the messenger that came. He is the 13th king, and in his day, the realm of Numenor had endured for more than 2,000 years, and was come to the zenith of its bliss, if not yet of its power. But Atanamar was ill-pleased, and gave little heed to this advice, wanting to escape age. And he lived to a great age, clinging to his life beyond the end of all joy. And he was the first of the Numenorians to do this, refusing to depart until he was witless and unmanned, and denying to his son the kinship at the height of his days. For the lords of Numenor had been wont to wed late in their long lives, and to depart and leave the mastery to their sons when they were come to full stature of body and mind. So there's this thing where they've always struggled with this sense that they begin to lose purpose. You know, they're so old, and they're going to decline, and they've been willing to nonetheless give up the ghost. And here, Tar-Atanamar, does not. And that is, that is not just the, if you like, I mean, isn't rebellion in these stories always the greatest of evils, but the petty sin of rebellion in the heart. Oh, we want to go, we don't believe you, we don't trust you, even though you are trustworthy. This is really a point where sadness actively enters in. There is a stain on the noonday. In the same way, one might suppose that you see Feanor's willfulness become a stain on the noonday, and his mother's burning out as a stain on the noonday of Valinor. Calamon becomes king, he's of like mind, and the people of Numenor become divided. Those who want to go to a man become known as king's men, and those on the lesser party are the Elendil, the elf friends. For though they remain loyal, they really hearken to the counsel of the Lords of the West. Interesting point, he makes it very clear this is not a case of civil rebellion and factionalism. The Elendil, the faithful, the elf friends, are faithful and loyal to the king, as well as to who is their appointed earthly ruler, as well as to their rulers on this earth, the Valar. Thus the bliss of Westness became diminished, but still in might and splendour increased, and they begin to build great tombs and discover if they might recall the secret of recalling life, or at least prolonging men's days. Yet they achieved only the art of preserving incorrupt the dead flesh of men, and they filled all the lands with silent tombs in which the thought of death was enshrined in the darkness. But those that lived turned them more eagerly to pleasure and revelry, desiring ever more goods and more riches. And after the days of Tar-Calamon, the offering of the first fruits to Eri was neglected, and men went seldom any more to the Hallow upon the heights of Menel Tarma in the midst of the land. So what we see here is two things, and they are the flip side of the same coin. That there is an obsession with death and of escaping death, and we would envision funerary rites and the Egyptians correctly. That's kind of what's being pictured here, and you see the same echoed a bit later in Gondor. It's a curse and something that haunts those of Numenorian stock, the Dúnedain. But the flip side is they also give themselves over to revelry. They are so scared of death that they throw themselves wholeheartedly, they would say, into life. To Tolkien, of course, this is bad because it's imbalanced. They're both excesses. Rather than the serious memento mori, considering you might die and so consider what to do with your life, there's an obsession with death and of avoiding death and of preserving the dead even though they are dead. But also, rather than enjoying good things, wine was made to make the heart glad. Instead of just enjoying the good thing, there's this frenzy of decadence and indulgence. And so in Tolkien's philosophy, you're talking here about the loss of the golden mean in those areas. There's an Aristotelian thing going on. Now, they want dominion in Middle-earth because of this. Maybe predictably they decide to get what they can't have eternal life in Aman, so they think. So they'll go and have earthly power in Middle-earth. And they go and they take great goods, silver and gold. They drink and they feast. In all this, the elf lands had small part. They alone came now ever to the north in the land of Gil-galad. Remember, Iranian Gil-galad. Interestingly, I found out the other day, Iranian Gil-galad is not a J.R.R. Tolkien name. It's a great name, but it's not a senior Tolkien name. It is the two names floating around for the same character, one of which may have been replaced with something else, but put together as as independently existing extant names at the end of the writing of this character by Chris Tolkien. But yeah, Gil-galad. The haven, I guess Gil-galad is necessary because of its presence in as a deed name or cognomen. But yeah, Iranian is what's up for debate. They make a haven above Pelargir in the mouths of Anduin the Great, so in Gondor later. But the king's men sailed far away to the south, and the lordships and strongholds that they have left left many rumours in the legends of men. We can think of Umbar and Harad, but we're presumably talking about the idea that this is all down the coast of fantasy Africa, maybe further east. Sauron rises again, and it's told elsewhere, and it's told, I guess, in the appendices of the Lord of the Rings, and in some of the back info of Lord of the Rings, and in the final chapter of this book, of the Rings of Power in the Third Age. He rises, and we'll talk about that next week, but he rises, and he becomes, he knows a lot about evil from Morgoth, and he now becomes the chief factotum of Morgoth upon the earth, and presumably maybe even thinks himself independent. Now in the 11th king's time, Tar-Minastar, already by now Sauron is powerful in Mordor, and he hates the Numenorians because of the deeds of their fathers, nor did he forget the aid that Tar-Minastar had rendered to Gil-galad of old in the time where the One Ring was forged. So here we have something where the point being that Sauron had appeared fair. He was, he's gift giver before the Sanatar. He helps with forging the Rings of Power, and then when he's exposed, when he wears the One Ring, he goes to Mordor and fortifies it. The Numenorians help the elves, and he is angry about this. The Numenorians aren't just helping the elves, but they're coming and taking over Middle-earth, which he thinks is his, but he doesn't challenge them. And he ensnares at least 3 great lords of the Numenorian race with the 9 rings. And when the Ilaria rose as the ring race, he now begins to assail the strong places of the Numenorians upon the sea. And the shadow falls deeper upon Numenor, and finally, so you can see a thing now where you have this war, this kind of constant low level, presumably, and low intensity warring between Sauron with his Numenorian lieutenants as well as his others, his Easterling and Haradrim or whatever, Northlings, because I guess, yeah, you probably assume they're from all over the place. If they end up in Angmar as well, do we know about that? Is the Witch King originally from the north? But yes, he begins to assail them and attack them, and things get worse, and kings pass from Atanamir, I guess, onwards, as they begin to go for more and more in Middle-earth, and eventually, Tar and Calamon, sorry, not Atanamar. The 20th king chooses to give up his name in Elven. He doesn't use it. He uses his name in. He prefers instead to call himself things in Adonaic. He ascends the throne in the name of Adunakor, Lord of the West, forsaking the Elven tongues and forbidding their use in his hearing. An interesting parallel to, of all people, Thingol. Thingol may have had better reason. His name, Hreneman, is inscribed in the High Elven speech. He is nonetheless, this title of Adunakor seems to the faithful overproud. The 23rd king, Ar-Gimilzor, is an even greater enemy of the faithful than the previous 3 kings. The white tree begins to decline. He forbids the elven tongues everywhere. He punishes those that welcome the ships of Eresia. The elves are still coming at this point. They retain their friendship with the faithful. Now the Elendil dwelt mostly in the western regions of Numenor, but Ar-Gimilzor commanded all that he could discover to be of this party to come to the east. You're no longer allowed to be at Andunie and receive the elves into your place to look at, to hear of the words of the Lord of the West, because I'm the Lord of the West. I rule here and I rule in Middle-earth, he would have said. The chief dwelling of the faithful is then in the harbour of Ravenna. Many set sail to Middle-earth, seeking the northern coast, going to Gil-galad, presumably to Pelargir, their haven. This was known to the kings, but they hindered it not, as long as they departed and did not return, for they desired to end all friendship between their people and the Eldar of Eresia, whom they named the spies of the Valar. But all they did was known to Manwë, separate from spying, And the Valar were wroth with the kings of Numenor, gave them counsel and protection no more, and the ships of Eressia came never again out of the sunset, and the havens of Dúnedain were forlorn. This is a great tragedy. This is the abandonment of the men who had the great blessing and of the wisdom and protection of the Lords of the West, who now have cursed themselves. Now, after the kings, there's the Lords of Dúnedain. They're of the line of Elros, being descended from Silmarillion. You can guess the etymology, I guess. Daughter of Elendil, the fourth king of Numenor. These lords were loyal to the king and revered them, and the Lords of Dúnedain were ever among the chief councillors of the sceptre. But as the shadow grew, they aided the faithful. So they become... this would not be something that Tolkien would have thought of particularly. I mean, there are other parallels, but he'd become like one of those Protestant noblemen who, or rather Catholic noblemen who helped and protected Protestant thinkers and writers, or controversial writers, in the early Reformation. Say Frederick the Old and Martin Luther. But they don't declare themselves openly, seeking rather to amend the hearts of the Lord of the Wise with wiser counsels. Now we hear that the sister of the Lord of Dúnedain, in the days of Ar-Sackle-Thor, was Inzilbeth, and Gimmelzor, Sackle-Thor's son, takes Inzilbeth to wife, for she, though this was little to her liking, because she's faithful. But the kings and their sons were grown proud, not to be gainsaid. No love was there between Ar-Gimmelzor and his queen, or between their sons. In Zilladun, the elder was like his mother in mind and in body, but Gimmelcad, the younger, went with his father, unless he were yet prouder and more wilful. To him, Ar-Gimmelzor would have yielded the sceptre, if laws had allowed. In Zilladun comes to the throne, though, and after these four kings, he is a Hezekiah or Josiah figure. He calls himself Tar Palantir. He's far-sighted. He gave peace for a while to the faithful. He went at due seasons to the Hollow of Eru upon Meltama, which Ar-Gimmelzor had forsaken. The white tree he tends with honour, and he prophesies that when the tree perishes, the line of kings will perish. But his repentance was too late to appease the anger of the Valar with the insolence of his fathers, of which the greater part of the people did not repent. And Gimmelcad was strong and ungentle when he took the leadership of the king's men. Thus the days of Tar Palantir became darkened with grief. He's a good king, a righteous king, a holy king, a prophetic king, but it's not enough. It's too late. He would spend much of his time in the west, and then ascended upon the ancient tower of King Minostar upon the hill of Aroma at night at Dúnedain, whence he gazed westward in yearning, hoping to see maybe some sail upon the sea. But no ship came ever from the west to Numenor, and Avalone was veiled in cloud. Now Gimmelcad died 2 years before his 200th year, accounted an early death, but this brought no peace to the king. For Pharazôn, son of Gimmelcad, had become a man yet more restless and eager for wealth and power than his father. He'd fared often abroad as a leader in the war, so he is a war hero. He's invaded many places. He has... I'm trying to remember. He knows about Sauron. He's a mighty leader. He marries Palantir's daughter, who should become queen, Miriel, but Pharazôn takes her as wife against her will, doing even this. They're too close. This is like Maeglin and Idril, first cousins, and this is the Old Testament law on the subject. Can't marry. They're wedded, and he takes the sceptre from what would have been, I guess, Miriel, Queen Miriel. He takes the title of Ar-Pharazôn, which would be Tarkalion, and she is renamed forcibly by him. He changed it to Ar-Zimrafel. She's faithful, but it is much like with Inzilbeth. There's this sign, and here because they're first cousins, they're not many cousins many times removed or whatever. As with the Lords of Dúnedain, they're cousins but not closely related. Instead, here you have a very close marriage, but the thing is the same of forcible marriage of faithful women by these wicked men. The mightiest and proudest was Ar-Pharazôn the Golden, of all those that wielded the sceptre of the Sea King since the foundation of Numenor. And 24 kings and queens had ruled the Númenóreans before and slept now in their deep tombs. So 23 kings, 1 queen is the point there. Hence why he's the 24th king, lying upon beds of gold. And sitting upon his carven throne in the city of Armenalos, in the glory of his power, he brooded darkly, thinking of war. So not exploring, but war, to go back to what I said earlier. For he had learned in Middle-earth of the strength of Sauron, and of his hatred of Westernesse. And now the masters of ships and captains, and they report Sauron's, they come and say, look, Sauron's putting forth his might. Our Pharazôn have gone back from Middle-earth, and things have gotten worse since he's left. And Sauron says he's the king of men. He was going to destroy the Numenorians. So Pharazôn is angry, and he determined without counsel of the Valar, or the aid of any wisdom but his own, that the title of king of men he would himself claim, and would compel Sauron to become his vassal and his servant. For in his pride he deemed no king should ever rise so mighty as to vie with the heir of Elendil. So he makes a great army and fleet, and the men in Middle-earth saw his sails coming up out of the sunset, dyed as with scarlet and gleaming with red and gold, and fear fell upon the dwellers by the coast, and they fled far away. But the fleet came at last to the place that was called Umbar, which was the mighty haven of the Numenorians that no hand had wrought, empty and silent were all the lands about. And he goes around for 7 days with his army. The tents of his host were ranged all about him, blue, golden, and white, as a field of tall flowers. Sauron comes. He perceives the power and majesty of the kings of the sea is greater than he can deal with for now. And he thinks more than one way to skin a cat, where force might not avail, the tongue might. He humbles himself. Pharazôn is not deceived, though. He thinks, well, look, Sauron's saying he'll give fealty to me and rule, only rule as a vassal in his own land, but I don't trust him. Come back with me to Numenor, he says. And Sauron, this is his secret thought, he receives this gladly. It chimed indeed with his desire. And he goes to Armenalos, and he's astounded by its beauty. But this is the thing about evil, is that it cannot enjoy, in Tolkien's world, it cannot enjoy anything. He is astounded by the beauty and glory of Armenalos, but he envies and hates it. And so, over time, Sauron, with many arguments, undermines anything that Pharazôn still believes or half believes of what the Valar said or of what they think about the world, to the point eventually he preaches the religion of Morgoth directly. He says, men could go around. There's still many places that they haven't gone to. Wealth is uncounted, and still if they should at the last come to the end of those lands and see beyond all they lay the ancient darkness. And out of it the world was made, for darkness alone is worshipful, and the Lord thereof may yet make other worlds to be gifts to those that serve him, so the increase of their power shall find no end. Which will in Tolkien's mind have brought to mind Isaiah 9 and the prophecy of the Messiah there. And so this idea that this religious language is perverted when talking about Satan, essentially. Who is the Lord of Darkness, Pharazôn says. Then behind locked doors Sauron spoke to the king, and he lied, saying, It is he whose name is not now spoken, for the Valar have deceived you concerning him, putting forward the name of Eru, a phantom, designed in the folly of their hearts, seeking to enchain men in servitude for themselves. They are the oracle of this Eru, which speaks only what they will, but he that is their master shall yet prevail, and he'll deliver you from this phantom, and his name is Melkor, Lord of all, giver of freedom, and he shall make you stronger than they. Promises that Ulfang and the other wicked Eastlings heard in the first age to their peril. Basically, Sauron says, Eru isn't God, Melkor is not Morgoth, Melkor. He's not the enemy of the world, he's a creator, he's the giver of freedom, the Lord of all. And our Pharazôn, at first in secret and then openly, worships Morgoth. And the faithful look to the Lord of Dúnedain, Amandil, counsellor of the king, whose son Elendil and grandsons Isildur and Anarion are ship captains. Well, at least Amandil and Elendil are. And they're of the line of Eros Tarminiatur. Amandil was close to Pharazôn at one point. I love this detail, by the way. Tolkien often has these bits where he highlights the complexity of people, even Pharazôn. Pharazôn, they're friends. He loves Amandil, and he trusts him until the coming of Sauron, but he's now dismissed because Sauron hates him, so Sauron undermines him. But Amandil was too noble and had been so mighty a captain of the sea that he was still held in honour by many of the people, and neither the king nor Sauron dared to lay hands on him as yet. But the faithful go to Ravenna, and the Menel Tarma is deserted, though Sauron doesn't dare to defile it. It is the holy place of the true god that Sauron lies about, and so he's not going to screw with that. He's too wise for that. But no one's allowed to go there, and Sauron says, let's cut down the white tree because it's a memorial of the evil Valar and the Eldar. The king knows that of the prophecy of Tar Palantir, his great uncle, his uncle? No, his uncle. So he doesn't do that because he knows the prophecy. But Amandil also hears of this, and he tells the story of the trees of Valinor to Elendil, and Isildur said no word but went out by night and did a deed for which he was afterwards renowned. He goes to Nimloth, he sneaks in past the guards, and he takes a fruit from Nimloth. This is a reversal of the Tree of Eden, and it's meant to be. It's meant to bring to mind perhaps that, or it could bring to mind that, but the whole thing, there's a lot of stuff here of the Edenic story. And rather than, the point is that the trees represent goodness, and the desire to go to the land of deathlessness, it is presumed that the thing in the soil, and that kind of makes you think of Feanor's possessiveness of the Silmarils and their beauty, which holds the light of the trees, of Ungoliant's hatred and love of the trees. Here, the tree is neglected. The tree that represents hope is neglected until someone goes and takes a fruit from it. And they plant it in secret, and the shoot arises. But when its first leaf opened, then Isildur, who had lain long and come near to death from being wounded by the guards as he leaves, arises and is troubled no more. And then the king and Sauron fell the white tree. The king finally loses his wits, basically. He used to love Amandil, then he hated Amandil. He used to think, even after that he had to keep the tree going, but now he doesn't. And they create a great temple in the form of a circle with walls 50 feet in thickness. The width of the base was 500 feet across the centre. The walls rise from the ground 500 feet, crowned with a mighty dome. Absolutely enormous. Simply monumental, titanic scale. The dome is all silver. But soon the light was darkened and the silver became black, for there was an altar of fire, and in the topmost of the dome there was a louvre whence there issued a great smoke. And the first fire upon the altar Sauron kindled with the hewn wood of Nimloth, and it crackled and was consumed. But men marvelled at the reek that went up from it, and the land lay under a cloud for 7 days, until slowly it passed into the west, as if the spirit of Nimloth returned to Yavanna. The fire and smoke go up without ceasing, for the power of Sauron increases, and they begin to sacrifice. Men made sacrifice to Melkor that he should release them from death, spilling blood. Most often from among the faithful they choose their victims, never openly on the charge they would not worship Melkor, but because they're rebels. An interesting insight into the way in which religious persecution often happens is a different excuse is found at first. You have too much money, or you're not sufficiently loyal for this reason, or whatever. But death does not depart from the land, rather it comes sooner and more often and in many dreadful guises. For whence aforetime men had grown slowly old and laid them down in the end to sleep, when they were weary at last of the world, now madness and sickness assailed them. And yet they were afraid to die and go out into the dark, the realm of the Lord that they had taken, and they cursed themselves in their agony. Nevertheless, for long it seemed to the Numenorians that they prospered, and if they were not increased in happiness, they grew more strong and their rich men ever richer. Sauron has subverted his great enemy by turning it to the service of Morgoth. With the aid and counsel of Sauron, they make even greater ships. They sail with power and armour to Middle-earth. They come no longer as bringers of gifts, nor even as rulers, but as fierce men of war. They hunt the men of Middle-earth. Then thus Ar-Pharazôn, king of the land of the star, grew to the mightiest tyrant that had yet been in the world since the reign of Morgoth, though in truth Sauron ruled from behind the throne. Ar-Pharazôn is more powerful than Sauron had been. The years lengthen, the king feels the shadow of death, and Sauron goes to him and says, look, doubtless that a gift of life unending is not for all, but it could be for you if we go to Valinor. Great kings do not brook denials and take what is their due. You know, maybe Manwë could be compared to Ar-Pharazôn, he says, but but the point is that even Manwë's equality of you is not a reason for you to listen to him when he denies you the gift. And Ar-Pharazôn says, "Yep, let's go. We're going to do this." And Amandil goes to his son Elendil and says, "We should sail into the. I'm going to sail into the west. Be their ban or no to seek help." And then says, "Would you then betray the king if you know well the charge they make against us?" "If I thought that Manwë needed such a messenger," said Amandil, "I would betray the king, despite the fact it's banned to go west. For there is but one loyalty from which no man can be absolved in heart for any cause, but it is for mercy upon men, and their deliverance from Sauron the Deceiver that I would plead, since some at least have remained faithful, 10 righteous men in Sodom and Gomorrah. And as for the ban, I will suffer in myself the penalty, lest all my people should become guilty. But what think you, my father, is like to befall those of your house whom you leave behind when your deed becomes known?" "It must not become known," said Amandil. "I'll prepare my going in secret." Basically, you should prepare your ships. Put aboard what you need, what you can't bear to part with, and prepare to depart whenever you hear note of trouble. Seek out the faithful that are known still to be true. Let them join you in secret if they are willing to go with you and share in your design. "And what will that design be?" said Elendil. "To meddle not in the war, and to watch. Until I return I can say no more, but it is most likely that you shall fly from the land of the star with no star to guide you. For that land is defiled. Then you shall lose all you have loved, foretasting death in life, seeking a land of exile elsewhere. But east or west, the Valar alone can say." Amandil says, "Farewell, for it may well prove that you will see me never again, and I'll show you no such sign as Elendil showed long ago, but hold you ever in readiness, for the end of the world that we have known is now at hand." And Amandil, with 3 dear servants, who he couldn't bear to part with and who couldn't bear to part with him, go. No further word or sign is heard of him. There's no tale or guess of his fate. Men could not a second time be saved by any such embassy, and for the treason of Numenor there was no easy absolving. Amandil may not have died. Perhaps some special arrangement was made, though indeed, if he were to die with his 3 servants and go beyond the circles of the world, you would assume, given his faithfulness, a reward will wait for him. But Elendil still plans for this, and then, as the gathering fleet gathers in the west, and Dúnedain is perverted from a place of meeting the Eldar to an invasion hub, from a pleasure beach, as it were, to an invasion hub. And the weather starts going wrong. Manwë starts sending like clouds in the shapes of eagles and lightning, and people, some few would repent for a season, but others hardened their hearts. Again, Old Testament language. They shook their fist at heaven, saying, "The lords of the west are plotted against us. They strike first." Of course, nothing's really happening. This isn't war. Morgoth knew of war, and the War of Wrath, where for 50 years the lords of the west and their elven vassals took war and destroyed the empire of Morgoth. This isn't war. These words, and the king himself spoke, but they were devised by Sauron. And then the fleets darkened the sea. They were like an archipelago of 1,000 isles. Their masts were as a forest upon the mountains, their sails like a brooding cloud, and all things waited upon the word of Ar-Pharazôn. And Sauron withdrew into the inmost circle of the temple, and men brought him victims to be burned. Then the eagles come out for battle, and as they came, their wings spread wider. So these are eagles who don't live in Middle-earth. These aren't those who dwelt under Thorondir or later under Gwaihir. These are those who stay with Manwë. But the west burned red behind them, and they glowed beneath, as though they were lit with a flame of great anger. So all Numenor was illumined with a smouldering fire, and men looked upon the faces of their fellows, and it seemed to them they were red with wrath. Then Ar-Pharazôn hardened his heart, and he went aboard his mighty ship, Alcarondas, Castle of the Sea. Many oared it was, and many masted, golden and sable, and upon it the throne of Ar-Pharazôn was set. Then this old man did on his panoply and his crown, and let raise his standard, and he gave the signal for the raising of the anchors, and in that hour the trumpet of Numenor outrang the thunder. And the fleets move against the menace of the west, and there was little wind, but many oars, so they keep going. Slowly the fleets passed out of the sights of the watchers in the havens, and their lights faded, and night took them, and in the morning they were gone. For a wind arose in the east, and it wafted them away, and they broke the ban of the Valar, and sailed into forbidden seas, going up with war against the deathless, to wrest from them everlasting life within the circles of the world. Ar-Pharazôn comes up out of the deeps of the sea, encompasses Avalone, so the Valar do not stop him getting to the very shores of the Undying Lands. The Eldar mourn, for the light of the setting sun was cut off by the cloud of the Numenorians. Comes to a man, all was silent, doom hung by a thread, for Ar-Pharazôn wavered at the end, perhaps reminded of his friendship once upon a time with Amandil, perhaps reminded of the holiness of his uncle, even though it wasn't his own heart. Almost he turns back. His heart misgave him when he looked upon the soundless shores and saw Tenochtitl shining whiter than snow, colder than death, silent, immutable, terrible as the shadow of the light of Ilúvatar. But pride was now his master, and at last he left his ship and strode upon the shore, claiming the land for his own, if none should do battle for it. And a host of the Númenóreans encamped in night about Tuna, whence all the Eldar had fled. Elendil came at festival time, and the Eldar were gone, and only a few were around. And now his descendant comes, Ar-Pharazôn, 26 generations further along, or 25 generations further along, and comes to Tuna, and it's empty, but they fled instead this time. Manwë upon the mountains called upon Ilúvatar, and for that time the Valar laid down their government of Ardra. Ilúvatar changes the fashion of the world, and the chasm in the sea is made, and the noise and smokes the cataract went up to heaven, and the fleets were drawn down. Ar-Pharazôn, the mortal warriors that had set foot upon the land of Aman, are buried under falling hills, lie imprisoned in the caves of the Forgotten until the last battle in the Day of Doom, which is one of the rare mentions we have of apocalypse in like a final apocalypse, and the kind of destruction of the world as it was in the remaking or whatever. We get it occasionally. But that's the only time in this book, at least, it's called the last battle. Ar-Pharazôn here reminds me a bit of characters, very, very characters, but Denethor, Gollum, even Sauron, in the sense that perhaps he repented for a time. Characters who cannot prevent their overreaching and are finally destroyed by their own. They know better. They even at the last have some chance to be different, or there are moments where you wonder if they redeem themselves, but they don't. Tolkien doesn't tell simple character stories, basically. The world is now made round. Eresia and Aman are taken and removed beyond the reach of men forever, and by this change, it's not that there's just a big chasm and you can't get over it, it's that the world has changed, and Andor, Numenor, Elena is destroyed. Is at the end of the rift, is overturned, destroyed, goes down into darkness. There's now not any place upon earth where the memory of a time without evil is preserved, because the point was that Valinor was a place without evil in itself, and Numenor, you could see it. For Ilúvatar cast back the great seas west of Middle-earth, and the empty lands east of it, and new lands and new seas were made. America is created by the destruction of Numenor and the removal of Valinor. The world was diminished, for Valinor and Eresia were taken from it into the realm of hidden things. In an hour unlooked for by men this doom befell, and on the 39th day since the passing of the fleets, fire burst from the Meneltama. Numenor goes down to the sea with its children, its wives, its maidens, and its ladies proud. All its gardens, its hills, and its towers. This is Sodom and Gomorrah, isn't it? Its tombs and its riches, its jewels and its webs and its things painted and carven, and indeed Noah's flood. And the ships fleeing away is obviously Noah's flood-esque. Its laughter, its mirth, and its music, its wisdom, and its law, they vanished forever. And last of all, the mounting wave, green and cold and plumed with foam, climbing over the land, took to its bosom Tarmiriel the queen, fairer than silver or ivory of pearls. Too late she strove to ascend the steep waves of the Meneltama to the holy place, for the waters overtook her, and her cry was lost in the roaring of the wind. But whether or no it were that Amandil came indeed to Valinor, and Manwë hearkened to his prayer, perhaps there was some mercy we do not know of. By grace the Valar, Elendil and his sons were spared. They avoid the soldiers of Sauron, who want to go and take Elendil and burn him, and they sail. They are sheltered from the first fury of the storm. There are 9 ships, 4 for Elendil, Isildur 3 and Anarion 2, and they are tossed on the waves. All the coasts and seaward regions of the western world suffered great change and ruin in those days. The seas invaded the lands, and so that's one thing, is Beleriand the remnants of Beleriand and Lindon presumably were also damaged again then. Elendil and his sons found kingdoms in Middle Earth. We know this story from the late Second Age. We'll hear a bit about it in the final chapter of the Silmarillion. Sauron, initially, his part in it is he's filled with fear. But he hadn't expected this to happen. He was sitting in his black seat. He's laughing when he hears the trumpets. He laughs when he hears the thunder of the storm. He laughs at his own thought, thinking what he would do now in the world now is get rid of the Dúnedain forever, the men who Eru is giving the world to, who are good men. He's taken the midst of his mirth, and his seat in his temple fell into the abyss. Again, very biblical language. But Sauron was not a mortal flesh, so though he is never able to take on a fair guise again, which had been his favourite, there's a parallel here to Morgoth losing the ability to shape change. He is still, his spirit survives, and he goes back to Barad-dûr, to his great ring. But these things about the ring and Sauron and the Eye of Sauron the Terrible come not into the tale of the drowning of Numenor, of which all is told. Even the land of the name of the land perished, and men spoke thereafter not of Elena, not of Andor the gift that was taken away, nor of Numenor on the confines of the world, but the exiles on the shores of the sea, if they turned toward the west, as I quoted already, in the desires of their hearts, spoke of Marni Falmar that was whelmed in the waves, Akallabêth the downfallen, Atalante and the Eldarin tongue. We do get a final story, though, which is that Meneltarma perhaps is not drowned. The tip of the mountain is perhaps not drowned. Some remnant is there, the holy place of Eru is not drowned. And tales and rumours arose on the shores of the sea concerning mariners and men forlorn upon the water, who by some fate or grace or favour of the Valar had entered in upon the straight way, and seen the face of the world sink beneath them, and so had come to the lamplit keys of Avallone, or verily to the last beaches on the margin of a man. The thing here being that the tip of Meneltarma perhaps is almost a sign of the straight road still remaining. The lamplit keys of Avallone, verily to the last beaches on the margin of a man, and there looked upon the white mountain, dreadful and beautiful, before they died. This goes back to the earliest stories of Tolkien, to the Book of Lost Tales, and Saxon mariners going to ending up in Eresia and hearing the stories of the First Age, and that's how we know them. The loss of Atlantis does not mean the total forsaking of mankind. The fact the world has changed does not mean that even for men perhaps there is not a way. We'll hear of the Eldar way there. And the fact that tip of Meneltarma, the highest point of Atlantis, might still remain out there for us at the Atlantic Ocean, is in the Legendarium the sort of proof of this interconnectedness and the continued hope and meaning. It's a sad story. It's a powerful story. It doesn't feel as crunched as Turin Turambar, but it definitely could be expanded. It could have been a novella proper, or a whole novel of the last couple of kings. I guess you'd tell that story. You wouldn't tell the whole story. But it's adaptable to screen in a way that I don't think will be happening in the same way with Rings of Power. They're presumably going to draw on some of that. But yeah, it's a great story, and one of my favourite chapters so far. You tell me what you think in the comments. Next week, or at the end of this week probably, we'll be finishing this whole series of Silmarillion chats all together with the final chapter. So join me then as well. Till next time.